Lila Donovan, the perfect suburban housewife, and Derek Hastings, the charismatic football coach, shared a dangerous secret one that would shatter the Donovan family forever. When Mark Donovan, Lila's husband, uncovered their affair, a quiet suburban street became the scene of a violent crime, leaving a trail of betrayal, obsession, and tragedy. Lila Donovan was the epitome of suburban perfection, at least to those who saw her from the outside. Her days were a predictable rhythm of routine and responsibility, spent keeping a spotless home, preparing elaborate dinners, and shuttling her teenage son Ryan to school and football practice. Married to Mark, a successful financial consultant, she seemed to have a life others envied. The Donovan family was often seen as the picture of stability in their affluent neighborhood, their home a gathering place for friends and neighbors during holidays and community events. Beneath the surface, however, the cracks were starting to show. Mark's demanding career kept him away for long hours, leaving little time for the couple to connect. When he was home, he was often preoccupied, his mind lingering on spreadsheets and stock forecasts instead of his wife. Lila, though surrounded by the trappings of success, felt an emptiness creeping into her carefully constructed world. Her solace came in the form of Ryan's football games. The roaring crowds, the electric energy, and the sense of camaraderie on the field offered a rare thrill in her otherwise monotonous existence. Ryan's new coach, Derek Hastings, only added to the excitement. Derek was everything Mark wasn't: charismatic, energetic, and deeply invested in the lives of his players. With his confident demeanor and rugged good looks, he quickly became the talk of the town. At first, Lila's interest in Derek was innocent. She admired his dedication to the team and the way he pushed Ryan to be his best. She found herself volunteering more at football events, helping with fundraisers and bake sales just to be around the team. Derek's easygoing nature and engaging conversations were a refreshing change from the strained silences she often endured at home. The shift was subtle at first. She started dressing more carefully for practices, applying a touch more makeup, choosing outfits that flattered her figure. She dismissed her actions as harmless, convincing herself that she simply wanted to feel better about herself. Derek, for his part, seemed oblivious, or perhaps he wasn't. Their conversations grew more personal, the occasional compliment exchanged with a knowing smile. Lila found herself thinking about him constantly, replaying their interactions in her mind long after the games ended. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, the dullness of her everyday life replaced by a pulse-pounding excitement she hadn't realized she craved. What began as casual admiration turned into an all-consuming obsession. When Derek started to linger after practices, helping her carry equipment or discussing team strategy, she didn't stop him. Their interactions felt like a dance, each move calculated yet instinctive. The boundaries between propriety and temptation blurred, but Lila didn't care. For the first time in years, she felt seen, desired, and alive. Lila told herself it was nothing, just a harmless escape from the routine. She didn't acknowledge the growing distance between her and Mark, or the way Ryan began to notice her absence during family dinners. Her world was shifting in ways she couldn't control, and she was too intoxicated by the thrill to care. The affair began with small, seemingly inconsequential decisions. A text message sent late at night under the guise of discussing team schedules, a moment of lingering eye contact after practice, a quick touch of his hand brushing hers. While passing equipment, it was all so subtle at first. Lila Donovan told herself it was innocent. She had no intention of letting things spiral into something uncontrollable. Yet every interaction with Derek Hastings pulled her deeper into a dangerous territory she couldn't resist. Derek had an undeniable magnetism that made him hard to ignore. He exuded confidence, the kind of man who commanded attention without trying. Lila found herself constantly drawn to him, her mind preoccupied with thoughts of their next meeting. It was no longer just about Ryan's football practices or team events. She would find excuses to see him, offering to deliver forgotten equipment or bringing snacks to the players simply to steal a moment in his presence. Their encounters began to take on a new dynamic. Lila and Derek developed a rhythm in their interactions, a coded language of smiles, subtle touches, and unspoken understanding. They started meeting in places that guaranteed privacy, a quiet corner of the local park, an out-of-the-way diner, or his empty office after hours. Each meeting pushed them closer to a line they both knew they shouldn't cross but felt powerless to resist. It didn't take long before secrecy became their way of life. Lila purchased a burner phone to keep their communications hidden, a decision that both thrilled and terrified her. The texts between them became more intimate, filled with playful teasing and words that hinted at emotions neither dared say aloud. The secrecy only heightened the intensity, making each stolen moment feel more electrifying. Despite her excitement, Lila couldn't shake the weight of guilt that lingered at the edges of her mind. She knew what she was doing was wrong for her marriage, wrong for Ryan, wrong for the life she had built. Yet, the more she tried to rationalize her actions, the more she convinced herself that she deserved this. Mark had been distant for years, their marriage reduced to polite exchanges, and the occasional forced date night. Derek made her feel alive again, and for that she was willing to risk everything. But living a double life wasn't easy. The stress of maintaining the facade began to take its toll. Lila became jumpy and distracted, constantly looking over her shoulder or checking her phone. She avoided certain neighbors and friends, worried that someone might notice the changes in her behavior. Even Ryan began to sense something was off. He asked why she was always volunteering for extra team duties, or why she seemed distracted during their conversations. Lila brushed off his concerns, but the unease was growing. Derek, too, was feeling the strain. As the team's head coach, he was a public figure in their small town, and the risk of exposure was enormous. Yet, the thought of ending things with Lila felt impossible. Their connection had become an addiction, one neither of them could quit. They both knew the risks, but neither was prepared for the catastrophic fallout that was inching closer with each passing day. Mark Donovan had always been a man of routine, meticulous and detail-oriented, qualities that had served him well in his career. But in recent months, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was amiss at home. Lila had grown distant, her once steady presence disrupted by unexplained absences and an air of distraction. Mark noticed small things at first forgotten errands, missed calls, and a certain nervousness when she was on her phone. One evening, while helping Lila clean up after dinner, Mark's suspicion deepened. He noticed her phone light up on the counter. She quickly turned it over, her face tightening for a split second before she resumed cleaning. It was a fleeting moment, but enough to set his mind racing. Lila, usually open and transparent, seemed to be hiding something. Mark began to pay closer attention. He watched her habits more carefully, noting how often she seemed to disappear without explanation. She claimed to be running errands or volunteering with the football team, but the timing felt odd. He brushed it off at first, convincing himself he was imagining things. Yet, the more he observed, the more uneasy he became. The breaking point came late one night when Mark awoke to find Lila missing from their bed. He found her downstairs, sitting in the dark, her phone in hand. She didn't notice him watching from the stairs, too engrossed in the screen to sense his presence. When she eventually returned to bed, Mark quietly slipped downstairs and retrieved her phone from where she had left it on the counter. What he found confirmed his worst fears. The phone, which he realized was not her usual one, contained dozens of messages exchanged with an unnamed contact. The tone of the texts was unmistakable, intimate, playful, and filled with subtle hints of a relationship far beyond friendship. Though the messages didn't explicitly reveal the other person's identity, the context was damning. Mark's world seemed to crumble in that moment. He felt a mixture of rage, betrayal, and a gnawing sense of inadequacy. How had he failed to see this coming? How long had it been going on? And most importantly, who was the man who had invaded his life so deeply? Determined to uncover the truth, Mark began his own quiet investigation. Over the following days, he monitored Lila's movements more closely, noting her destinations and timing. He discreetly tracked her phone and pieced together patterns that aligned suspiciously with Ryan's football practices. The realization that the other man was likely Derek Hastings, Ryan's coach, left him reeling. Mark's devastation quickly turned into cold, calculated anger. He resolved not to confront Lila immediately, knowing he needed more evidence. He began attending practices under the guise of supporting Ryan, forcing friendly interactions with Derek while watching him closely. Mark's behavior remained calm and collected, but inside he was seething. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, Mark began to plan his next move. This wasn't just about his marriage anymore, it was about reclaiming his pride, his family, and his sense of control. Little did he know, his growing obsession with the truth would set off a chain of events far more devastating than he could imagine. The air was crisp that evening, the first hints of autumn settling over the quiet suburban streets. Mark Donovan paced the living room, his mind churning with conflicting emotions. He had invited Derek Hastings over under the pretense of discussing Ryan's performance on the team, masking his true intentions behind a veneer of calm. Mark's plan wasn't fully formed, but his fury had grown unbearable. The idea of the man he had once trusted betraying him so deeply filled him with a simmering rage he could no longer contain. Derek arrived promptly, his usual confident demeanor intact. He had no reason to suspect that Mark knew anything. To him, this was just another conversation with a parent, another opportunity to cement his role as the affable coach. Mark greeted him warmly, offering a drink and guiding him into the living room. He gestured for Derek to sit, pouring 2 glasses of whiskey as he carefully chose his words. The conversation began innocuously, with Mark asking about Ryan's progress and the team's upcoming schedule. But as the minutes passed, his questions grew pointed, layered with subtle accusations disguised as casual remarks. Derek, initially at ease, began to sense an underlying tension. He shifted in his seat, his composure faltering slightly under Mark's steady gaze. Mark's tone darkened as he steered the discussion toward loyalty and betrayal. "Trust is everything, don't you think?" he said, his voice low but firm. Derek hesitated, sensing the shift but unsure of its source. The room seemed to close in around them, the silence between each exchange heavy with unspoken truths. It was then that Mark revealed his hand. Pulling out the burner phone he had found, he placed it on the coffee table between them. Derek's expression shifted instantly, his confidence giving way to alarm. Mark leaned in, his voice cold and steady. "How long has it been going on?" Derek stammered, his mind racing for an explanation, but Mark didn't wait for an answer. The anger he had suppressed for weeks boiled over, his voice rising as he demanded the truth. The confrontation quickly escalated, words turning into accusations and accusations into threats. Derek, caught off guard, tried to defuse the situation, but his attempts only fueled Mark's rage. As the argument reached its peak, Lila entered the room, her face pale as she took in the scene. She had overheard the commotion from the kitchen and rushed to intervene, but her presence only added to the chaos. Mark turned on her, his fury now directed at both of them. In the heat of the moment, Mark grabbed a heavy trophy from the shelf, a memento from one of Ryan's football victories, and swung it with blind rage. The blow struck Derek on the side of the head, sending him crashing to the floor. The room fell silent, the weight of what had just happened sinking in as Derek lay motionless, blood pooling beneath him. Lila screamed, her voice piercing the stillness as she rushed to Derek's side. Mark stood frozen, the trophy slipping from his grasp as the enormity of his actions hit him. The perfect life he had fought so hard to maintain was now shattered beyond repair, the consequences of his fury irreversible. The aftermath of that night unraveled with a speed that left no time for reflection. Lila's shaking hands dialed 911, her voice barely coherent as she reported the incident. Derek's lifeless body lay on the floor, a pool of crimson spreading beneath him. Mark stood in the corner of the room, his face ashen and his mind numb. He barely registered the sound of the sirens growing louder, signaling the arrival of the authorities who would change their lives forever. The police entered the home, their expressions grim as they surveyed the scene. Mark offered no resistance as they handcuffed him and led him away. His silence was interpreted as guilt, his lack of a defense damning. Lila, though not taken into custody, was questioned for hours, her fragmented recollection of events offering little clarity. She was consumed by a mix of grief, guilt, and shock, unable to comprehend how everything had spiraled so far out of control. News of the incident spread like wildfire through the small town, leaving its residents stunned. The Donovans had always been a respected family, the kind everyone aspired to emulate. Now, their home was a crime scene, and their names were splashed across headlines. The revelation of Lila's affair with Derek added fuel to the fire, turning what might have been a private tragedy into a public scandal. The trial that followed was a media circus. Mark was charged with second-degree murder, the prosecution painting him as a man driven by jealousy and rage. The affair between Lila and Derek became the focal point, with every sordid detail exposed in court. The defense argued that Mark had acted in a moment of blind fury, fueled by betrayal and emotional turmoil. But the evidence was damning, and the jury found him guilty. He was sentenced to life in prison, the judge's gavel sealing his fate. For Lila, the punishment came in a different form. Though she wasn't charged with a crime, she became a pariah in her own community. Friends turned their backs on her, and whispers followed her everywhere she went. She moved out of the family home, unable to bear the constant reminders of what had happened. Her once cherished life was now a shell of its former self, filled with regret and isolation. Ryan bore the heaviest burden of all. The coach he admired and the father he loved had both been taken from him in a single, violent act. He struggled to reconcile the mother he thought he knew with the woman whose actions had set these events in motion. His grades slipped, and he withdrew from friends, the weight of his family's tragedy suffocating him. In time, Ryan found solace on the football field, using the game as an outlet for his pain. But the shadow of that night loomed large, shaping the man he would become. Lila, too, tried to rebuild her life, though the scars of her choices remained. The once perfect family was now a cautionary tale, their downfall a reminder of how quickly secrets and betrayals could destroy even the most carefully constructed lives.